Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
I'm very happy to be here with you this morning. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I have a old age-related health issue that's kind of kept me homebound, but otherwise all is well. I hope to be with you next time, perhaps. So, speaking of older age, Suzuki Roshi, who was the founder of the San Francisco Zen Center, was once asked in a public forum, "Why do we practice meditation?" To which he answered, "So we can experience a pleasant old age." I'm in my 70th year now, and as I get older, I've come to appreciate that answer. Old age comes with a whole constellation of indignities and challenges, often resulting in a feeling of vulnerability. The ability to accept that life is unreliable, which is a definition of dukkha, is essential to maintaining peace of mind. The Buddha often used the heavenly messengers of old age, illness, and death as important reminders that motivate us to practice. Because for most of us, these are the scariest things imaginable. One of my teachers, Gil Fronsdal, frames the "why do we practice" question a bit more directly. He says that we are practicing in order to prepare ourselves for the worst thing that will ever happen. But old age, illness, and death may not be on your list of the worst things. Perhaps you are younger or simply not concerned by these possibilities. For you, the worst thing might be injustice, climate change, or political instability. There are people who thought that the elections of Donald Trump, or for that matter, Barack Obama, was the worst thing imaginable, and feel the same way about the political prospects of the next few years. Whatever is on your worst thing imaginable list, the Buddha's core teaching is that it's possible to maintain equanimity or peace of mind no matter what's going on in your life or the world. And we do that by accepting the nature of things as they are. Ajahn Sumedho, a revered Buddhist monk, likes to say, "It's like this. Old age is like this. Political instability is like this. Not getting the result of what I want is like this." It doesn't mean that we give up trying to change or improve the world, our world. It means that we learn to differentiate between what we can have an impact on and what is out of our control. The Serenity Prayer is a very useful Dharma practice. I recommend it. If your happiness is dependent on always having the things the way you want them to be, you will suffer. It's as simple as that. In the parable of the two arrows, the Buddha reminds us that freedom from suffering comes more from letting go of our reactivity to events rather than the events themselves. The great Dharma teacher Joseph Goldstein goes even a step farther when he states that we are 100% responsible for our own suffering. So I'll chew on that a little bit. When asked how he managed to embody equanimity, as he was perceived to do, Krishnamurti said, "This is my secret. I don't mind what happens." We usually talk about peace in political or historical contexts. But of course, it's often said that peace begins within. Nisargadatta said, "The world is the way it is because people are the way they are. As long as people are the way they are, the world will continue to be the way it is. If we want to have a peaceful world, it's necessary to have peaceful people. Peace is not something that can be imposed on the world." End quote. So I had quite an ordinary insight about this recently. One morning I was reading the news and became agitated about a particular story. And I was so annoyed that I turned off the screen. I was reading news on my computer, and I sat down to meditate. And within minutes, I was able to let go of my anger and agitation that had resulted from my exposure to the news a few minutes before. And I simply rested in the experience of the moment. I saw that every time my mind started to return to that distraction, and I was feeling the compulsion to do that, the craving, every time I was drawn to that and noticed and brought my attention back to my breath, to the present moment, I was choosing peace. Over and over again. Sometimes you choose peace in this way dozens of times, if not hundreds of times, in a given meditation. But this is simply how we train the mind to become peaceful. We come back to the present moment over and over again when the mind wants to drift into distraction or agitation. Now, neither my judgments about that issue that I was worked up about, nor my commitment to address it in a practical way has changed in any way that morning. Nothing changed. But my attachment to my opinion, my inclination to obsess about it, disappeared. And I experienced some peace. If you were worrying about politics this week, as I am, I encourage you to practice in this way. Give yourself a break. It's a self-compassionate action. As Nisargadatta said, peace cannot be imposed on the world, and neither can it be imposed on the mind. Pacifying the mind is not a matter of forcing it to be peaceful, but rather gently guiding it back to the present, which we can only experience through our six senses. That's reality for us, our six senses. Thinking has nothing to do with it, except insofar as we notice that thinking happens at times. The peace of samadhi is not conceptual. It's a stillness that arises from gradually training the mind, from carving new neural pathways, by cultivating different habits of mind. This is the practice. In the Bible, this is called the peace that surpasseth all understanding. The 20th century Thai monk and teacher, Ajahn Chah, said that looking for peace is like looking for a turtle with a mustache. You won't be able to find it. But when your heart is ready, peace will come looking for you. We can't always call up inner peace on demand, but we can create the conditions for it. When we sit down to meditate, we are choosing peace. When we guide the unruly mind back to the body, we are choosing peace. When we make the choice to not look at our phone every few minutes, or to limit our exposure to social media or the news feeds, we are choosing peace. When we recognize and let go of our habitual aversive mind states, we are choosing peace. By making these kinds of choices, we cultivate peace. The Buddha, who lived in an agricultural society, often used the cultivation metaphor. If you want to grow beans, he said, you have to plant beans. But planting in itself won't guarantee that you'll get beans. It helps to have good seeds and rich soil, and to have the kind of climate that will provide the right balance of sun and rain. Some of that is within your control. Much of it is not. So if we want peace of mind, we likewise have to cultivate the right conditions. It helps to orchestrate a quiet lifestyle, or at least invite periods of quiet. You'll cultivate more peace if you meditate once or twice a day, rather than if you wait for sangha meetings, or perhaps your next retreat. Because every moment of mindfulness cultivates further moments of mindfulness. Cause and effect. If carefully cultivated over time, eventually mindfulness proliferates. Most spiritual traditions have, or we should maybe say once had, times of peace built into their calendars. Muslims pray 5 times a day. The fact that most religions have a Sabbath suggests to me that a day off is a pretty fundamental human need. Essential for our psychological and spiritual well-being. For previous generations, the Sabbath was the most important day of the week. The other days were considered preparation for the Sabbath. Nowadays, people often tell me that they're too busy to meditate. And the very notion of honoring a Sabbath day is met with an eye roll. So no wonder that we are overwhelmed and neurotic. No wonder we're having a mental health crisis in this country. In Buddhist monasteries, Sabbath days are called upasita days, and they're based on the lunar calendar. On every full moon, every new moon, and the 2 half moons in between, in other words, about once a week, monastics don't do any work. They stay up all night meditating. Maya Angelou says that every person needs to take one day away, a day in which one consciously separates the past from the future. Jobs, family, employers, and friends can exist one day without any one of us. And if our egos permit us to confess, they could exist eternally in our absence. Each person deserves a day away in which no problems are confronted, no solutions searched for. Each of us needs to withdraw from the cares which will not withdraw from us. End quote. So that beautiful invitation could describe an hour of meditation or a day of retreat, a day of Sabbath. If I could resurrect one lost spiritual tradition for the benefit of humankind, it would be the Sabbath. Give it a try sometime. Set aside one day where you eschew screens. Don't do any work. And as Angelo recommends, don't search for solutions. In a culture that rewards productivity above all else, that's not so easy. But I know people who do it. And if you find it challenging, make that part of the practice. Being mindful of your compulsion to consume information, to distract yourself, or to get busy when you're trying to be quiet. Simply notice that. It's skillful to pay particular attention to our habit of looking for distractions when we are feeling restless or unsettled. T.S. Eliot said that we are distracted from distraction by distraction. We are distracted from distraction by distraction. In other words, when we are restless and distracted, we do just the opposite of what we should be doing. We go looking for more distractions to make us feel better. So choosing peace can feel counterintuitive to Westerners. When the mind rebels against stillness, that's usually the ego asserting its authority. The Burmese teacher Sayadaw U Pandita puts it like this. Pull that up. When the mind indulges in distractions, it becomes agitated. This is the usual state of affairs of the world, as we can observe. In their quest for happiness, people mistake excitement of the mind for real happiness. They never have the chance to experience the greater joy that comes with peace and tranquility. If you really want a deep dive into peace, you might choose to go on a meditation retreat rather than a vacation next year. As many of you know, a retreat is not always peaceful. Sometimes it's an invitation to process all the dukkha that we have been avoiding. This can be a rude awakening for folks on their first meditation retreat, as some of you experienced. But working through that dukkha and finding peace on the other side is the ultimate benefit of a retreat. It can feel like an intensive multi-day session of psychotherapy with an immediate reward at the end, which is, of course, liberation. Liberation in real time. As Gary Snyder points out, meditation is not just a rest or retreat from the turmoil of the stream or the impurities of the world. It is a way of being the stream, so that one can be at home in both the whitewater and the eddies. At my very first retreat, when I was 17 years old, the teacher of the retreat used that same metaphor, comparing the mind to a river or a rushing stream. And I've been using it ever since. There's a lot going on in that river with its white water and its eddies. There are leaves and sticks, fish and insects, calm pools, roaring rapids. But if we simply relax and observe it flowing by, it's a profoundly peaceful experience. The term stream suggests that a river is never perfectly still. It's constantly changing. So peace isn't about having a perfectly still mind. It's about being the stream. So the Buddha also used the water metaphor in talking about the mind when he said, "Rest in a mind that is like water, where experiences both pleasant and unpleasant can appear and disappear without conflict, struggle, or harm. Rest in a mind that is like water." Deepa Ma was an Indian woman who came to the Dharma late in life, the 20th century, as a lay practitioner. after a life of being a householder and a businesswoman. Her biography is quite inspirational, and many people who knew her, including some of my teachers, claim that she was fully awakened in her lifetime. On being asked about the qualities of an awakened mind, she answered, excuse me. When asked about an awakened mind, she said, love, concentration, and peace. So peace is a quality of mind. And as I quoted earlier, you can't really go looking for it. You can't purchase it. You can't consume it. And striving doesn't help. Relaxation is essential for meditation, where striving is more of a hindrance than help in finding peace. Peace of mind is more a matter of letting go than in getting something. Letting go being the essence of the Buddha's third noble truth. Letting go of our relentless craving and clinging is the secret to the alleviation of suffering. I know that you've heard this Ajahn Chah quote before, but it bears repeating. It's one of my few quotes that I actually have memorized because I use it so much. Ajahn Chah said, if you let go a little, you'll have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you'll have complete peace. And your struggles with the world will have come to an end. That last line is often left out when people share that quote. And your struggles with the world will have come to an end. But it encapsulates the heart of the Buddha's teaching, that our struggles with the world can actually come to an end. What a radical idea that is. Do you believe it? The Buddha said, I teach only suffering and the end of suffering. The end of suffering being peace of mind. He didn't promise that we'll not get old and die, suffer misfortunes, or lose our loved ones. But rather, he offered a practice that helps us to accept the vicissitudes of life with equanimity. Peace is dependent on our attitude and state of mind, not on the circumstances of our lives. Peace is always available to us, no matter what is going on in our world. The metaphysical poet John Donne, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare's, said, be thine own palace, or the world's thy jail. Be thine own palace, or the world's thy jail. The fact that we are all gathered here virtually this morning, either in person or virtually, depending on where you're sitting, is evidence that you are interested in fostering peace in your lives. Speaking for myself, inner peace is a significant motivation for my practice. It keeps me on the path. Peace is both the practice and the outcome of practice. Just imagine if everyone across the political spectrum actually took a day off from screens, tweets, and social media, and perhaps spent that day in meditation or prayer, or feeding the hungry, or reaching out to a neighbor in need. What if we could accept that getting our way isn't always possible, and trust that our happiness is not dependent on that? So no matter what the outcome of the upcoming election this week or the next one in 2 years, it could be met with peace. And if you're dissatisfied with the outcome, a peaceful mind will support you in your efforts to bring about the change that you want to see in the world. Keep in mind that the fierce samurai warriors of old meditated before they went into battle. Spiritual warriorship takes many forms, but the practice and the goal is always peace. And here's a promise based on my own experience. If you spend an hour or two a day cultivating peace of mind, it will eventually become a habit of mind. That doesn't guarantee that you will have peace of mind 24/7, but rather that you will always be able to access it, to tap into it as a familiar refuge. Peace is not a gift, it's a choice. So that's what I have to offer this morning, and I was hoping that it might generate some discussion. So I'm going to put everybody on gallery view, and I'm not quite sure how you manage questions when we have people in person and also people online. But I'm inviting feedback or questions or your reflections on peace of mind.
Perhaps people online could raise their hand, use the raise the hand icon, and people in the room, I'll let you know, David, if there are people in the room who have their hand raised.
Great, please. And if it would be helpful, I pulled out a couple of discussion points. I actually planted a couple of things in this talk that were intended to be a little provocative. One of which you might have triggered you a bit is Joseph Goldstein's quote that we are 100% responsible for the suffering in our lives. Another one is the idea that it's skillful to accept worldly events that we cannot personally challenge. We simply have to accept them. And the third is, do you think it's possible that our struggles with the world can come to an end in this very lifetime? If any of those intrigue you, I'd be happy to talk about them.
Jeff.
Thank you, David, for a wonderful talk. I really like the emphasis on peace, and what Joseph said. I think is so radical, but ultimately true. Even though I don't live that way 24/7, but it's an inside job. Thank you.
Thank you. I assume that's Jeff Lindemood. I recognize his voice, and I heard most of it. But yeah, peace is an inside job, indeed. So it's something that we really need to tap into. I think this is my view and opinion. Practically all the discussions I've been having, especially with my Dharma friends and my non-Dharma friends lately, have been about politics and about the election, and people are really agitated. But that was the motivation for my giving this talk this morning. Peace comes from within.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Cantwell. Hi, Tom. Are you in Portland?
Hi, David. I am back in Portland, and it was a wild 3-day drive from southern Arizona with a 15-foot U-Haul, and it was one of the most stressful events of my life. It's so good to have a good internet connection that just came about last night,
Glad
and it's so good to see you again. And I missed you on probably the last couple of Thursdays as well. This morning, no sooner did we get started than the leaf blowers in the neighborhood that seemed to go 24/7. Sunday, it so much reinforced that what you said about having a day of rest and peace. And it got me thinking, well, the leaves will all be down pretty soon. I won't have to deal with this all 4 seasons, hopefully. And it's compost not only for wherever they take the leaves, but for meditation. And so I knew I was in the right place. And thank you for your talk. It was so concentrated and so good.
Thank you, Tom. It is compost for meditation. It is indeed. And leaf blowers are just noise. That's the mindful response to leaf blowers. That's just noise. I often tell the story of when I first started teaching the Thursday morning meditation group that I've been leading for a dozen years. We were meeting in Sharzahev's synagogue on Dolores Street, and they had torn up all the sidewalks around the synagogue, they were tearing it up to replace them in parts of the street. So for the first several weeks of teaching a beginning meditation class, there were what are the drills that they blow up sidewalks? What they're called?
Jackhammers.
Jackhammers going. So that's how I taught meditation. Is we started out with mindfulness of hearing for several weeks, and that's a mindfulness practice. Mindfulness of hearing. Hearing is like this, without letting it agitate us, without getting upset. So by the time we got around in that class talking about mindfulness of thoughts, of thinking, somebody in the group very wisely surmised. They said, "Hey, thoughts are just noise in the head, right? Is that a correct conclusion?" I said, "That's exactly the right conclusion. Thoughts are just noise in the head, and just as ignorable." Oh, thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Mike has his hand up here at Bartlett Street.
David, thanks again for a wonderful talk. It was, for me, incredibly timely and relevant, not only in terms of the election. I mean, I find myself being a burning vessel of indignation over whatever is, happening to the country and what have you. So it's important to recognize we don't have control over that, and I don't have control over it. So the idea of control and all. I also have a medical procedure this week, a biopsy that I'm very anxious about, and I think your words were helpful to me in terms of trying to get some distance from that and recognize that I have to, there's no way I can control this and process or outcome or what have you, but be with it, I guess, if I understand you.
Yeah, well, spoken with wisdom, and yes, being with it is not easy, but it's something we can do. And part of being with it is acknowledging that I don't like this. This is not pleasant. But also at the same time, it's unavoidable. So here we are. I've kind of been developing as I'm experiencing the vicissitudes of old age, not to mention 35 years of living with AIDS. But as I'm losing my eyesight, I'm losing my hearing, I'm losing my mobility gradually, I'm losing my mind. my memory is starting to go. Some of you can relate to that. And my mantra has become, this is what's supposed to happen. This is what's supposed to happen. The body breaks down. This is nature. This is just nature. So I'm sorry about your challenges, and challenges are part of the nature of being human. So it's wonderful in Sangha that we've got a place where we can share that and share the compassion.
Richard has his hand raised online on Zoom.
Yes, hi, greetings. Thank you for your talk very much. Peace of mind is what I strive for every day. It's often very challenging, but there's ways to practice both gratitude and peace. Whenever I don't really often get a whole day, but certainly on the bus or in transit, or whenever there's a moment that I'm not occupied in doing something, I can give that moment to practicing peace and gratitude and blessings. And also, I make a request. Is it possible somehow to get a portable mic we could give to people in the room so we can actually hear the questions that are being offered or the comments made on a wireless mic? Just a thought. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a bit challenging.
Thanks for that suggestion. I'll bring it up with the board meeting next week.
And thank you, Richard. Thank you for sharing.
Lee has his hand raised here.
Thank you. So thank you, David, for your talk, which I found helpful and supportive, not only for the content, but for the equanimity. And I want to ask you about one particular aspect of it, which I have found recently. One of the three threats is also oddly a comfort. So there's sickness, old age, and death. And the one which I have found oddly somewhat of a comfort is death. And I am 83 at this point, and while I don't have anything particular life-threatening at the moment, I am 83, and I know things that portends. And I find from time to time contemplating not my needs or something, not personal stuff, but the worldly stuff like politics and climate change and what seems to be the foolish things that people do in groups and the hostile things. And then it sort of pops into my mind sometimes of not going to be here. And it also pops into my mind somewhat, neither is anyone else. And that in some sense, it's all just ephemeral. And I know, and certainly have read that one of the central practices of Buddhism and from other religions actually is a contemplation of the details of death, which I never found desirable to do or comfortable. But I still don't think I want to, but that realization is there. And I wonder, some of the things you mentioned, whether you might have found that too. And I want to add one more thing, though, particularly myself. My greatest difficulty through my adult life has been insomnia, which is now pretty well cured. And it's about anxiety. And I realize there's a certain contradiction. My greatest desire is to be able to just go there and disappear, be unconscious. So what is the difference between that and death? In some sense, it doesn't seem really different. So I'm wondering if you have any experience, and particularly given some of the things you were talking about, or about the Buddhist practices around contemplation of death.
I think I heard most of that. So if I don't successfully address it, feel free to let me know. Contemplation of death, yes, that's a a practice that the Buddha advocated. And there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And the Buddha actually offered lists, offered instructions on how to contemplate death, and one of which is contemplating what actually happens to the body, what happens literally when we get sick, when we die, when we rot in the grave. That might be what you have some aversion to. People generally do. That's not an easy contemplation. The Buddha also, or alternatively, invited us to contemplate the five remembrances. And the five remembrances, and he said, do this every day. And I wish I had them in front of me. I'm not going to be able to quote them exactly, but the five remembrances is I'm of the nature to get sick. I'm of the nature to become ill, to become old, get sick, get old. I'm of the nature to die. I will lose everything that's dear to me, near to dear, everyone and everything that's near and dear to me until I die myself. I'm going to lose everything that is dear to me. And the last one is that my only possession is karma, is my actions. It's the only thing that I actually own. I did the five remembrances for years, for many years, and now I simply reflect on daily practice, and it doesn't push my buttons at all anymore, that I am going to die. The closer I get to it, the easier it is, and that's just part of nature. That's my rationalization. That's what's supposed to happen. As I was saying earlier, that's just nature. Everybody that's ever lived, ever been on this planet up to now has that is gone. Everybody that's lived has died. So it's only natural that we should. So shouldn't be a scary thing. But of course it is, and that's because death is the great unknown. And you said something about loss of consciousness and death and what the difference is. And that one, I don't.
Going to sleep, which is often
going to sleep. Yeah. Yeah, well, I can't speak to how that's like death because I haven't died yet. I haven't had that experience. But I can say, speaking of insomnia, that over the years, my meditation practice has made insomnia not be a problem. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I no longer suffer insomnia, but because my meditation practice is so habitual, if I wake up during the course of the night, and I can't go back to sleep, I just meditate. I just follow whatever's happening in my experience, including the flow of thoughts, the flow of well, you've all heard meditation instructions, thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, the sense of being warm in bed. You just let it all flow. Phenomena comes and goes, it changes, and we notice that, especially in the middle of the night. I actually find meditating in the middle of the night, or especially right at the moment that I wake up in the morning, to be a really powerful time to meditate. And one of my teachers told me why that is, why it's so particularly powerful. He said, that's because, the reason that you'd love to be present and meditate the moment you wake up in the morning is because you're not David yet. In other words, my ego hasn't kind of clicked in, and I'm just noticing the flow of phenomena instead of stressing about this and planning that and worrying about the other thing. It's just thoughts arising and passing, thoughts and sensations arising and passing. So the middle of the night or first thing in the morning is a profound time to practice. Just pay attention to what's going on without judging, without trying to control it, without trying to make anything happen. One thing I never do is try to make myself go back to sleep. That just doesn't work. But sometimes it happens quite naturally. It sneaks up on me. So I hope that was helpful.
David, you mentioned earlier the serenity prayer. And so I'm wondering, do you think of like paying attention to what's going on in the world as a kind of addiction? And how do you deal with, if it is, like, is it something you deal with kind of in the way of maybe Overeaters Anonymous, where you can't like stop your connection to awareness of the rest of the world? You have to somehow strike a balance.
Great question, Cass. I do think it's an addiction. And what's an addiction is thinking. Thinking is the addiction. The world is going to be doing its thing, whether we're obsessed with it or not. The world's just going to do its thing. We're completely irrelevant. But if we're thinking obsessively about it, that's a problem, and that is an addiction. And I often say that I think that the mindfulness practice has an awful lot to do with a lot in common with addiction work. Because we're breaking that addiction to our habitual thoughts. We're breaking a habit and developing new habits. And when it comes to the serenity prayer, grant me the serenity to accept things that I cannot change, the courage to change things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We're really good in the West. We Americans are really good at the doing part, at the changing thing part. So sometimes when I give versions of this talk, people get a little bit irate with me and say, "How can you just say we just have to accept things? You know, I want to do something. I'm a doer. I want to do things." Well, my argument is that we're really good at doing. We're already experts at doing. We're doers. If a friend tells us that they're sick or they have an illness, we say, "What can I do? How can I help?" And we gear ourselves up. What we're not so good at in the part of the serenity prayer is the acceptance part. And that actually makes people pretty uncomfortable sometimes. It's accepting something that they don't want to, that they're not comfortable with. We may get a political result on Tuesday night that some of you aren't comfortable with, and that can cause you more suffering or less suffering depending on how reactive you are to it. So that's why I gave this talk. I hope that we notice our reactivity. I hope we're sensitive to our reactivity and realize, okay, some of this I can't control. I can't change. I can't make it different. And that's a moment for acceptance. That's a moment for wisdom, of realizing what I can change and what I can't change. That's the wisdom part of the serenity prayer. So thanks for coming back to that, Cass, because I'm so fond of it. And Bob has his hand up.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you so much for the whole talk. You just mentioned the serenity prayer. And there's a serenity image of your dog behind you that I would like to forever remember.
If there was a squirrel at that window, it wouldn't be serene.
He or she just looks so at peace for the whole talk. I'm trying not to be jealous, but thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, all it takes is a squirrel, and it goes from serene peace to instant alertness. It's a Dharma lesson. Anybody else? Or Cass, tell me when it's time to stop taking questions.
I'll just throw in one thing. It's Grisha over in the corner. You said
You're muted.
to prepare ourselves for. No, I'm using that one.
Okay.
We practice to prepare ourselves for the worst thing that will happen, and then while you're doing it, I was making a list of the worst thing that could happen. So I think it's kind of interesting to meditate on that. And one of them is the death of my siblings, that things that I might and most likely will see. And other things are things like living with chronic pain that may happen. Anyway, it's kind of like a motivation to practice more, I guess, is all I want to say. And I thought it was an interesting process to just make a list of the worst imaginable things. I've never thought about that.
Yeah, and everybody's got that list, and it's different for everyone. And that brings me back to that the quote, which I thought was one of the most provocative things that I heard when I first heard it. The quote from Joseph Goldstein, where he said, "We're 100% responsible for the suffering in our lives." Everybody can think of examples of natural disasters or wars or disease or terrible family losses where we think, wait, I'm not responsible for that. Well, no, you're not. But we're responsible for our reactivity. And there are, if you were truly coming from an enlightened state of mind, more enlightened than my state of mind, you might be able to just nod at those events and say that's part of being human. Loss, death, illness, disasters, it's all part of being human. So any suffering that we add to that is the suffering that we create. And that's a profound distinction I find in that Buddhism offers that most other spiritual traditions don't. It's recognizing that pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. That's a fundamental Buddhist message. Pain is inevitable and suffering is optional.